It was a protest that changed China forever.
It scared the living daylights out of the party central command.
10 years after Tiananmen Square, it's the eve of the millennium, and 10,000 people silently gather in front of the homes of China's leaders. They come quietly, and they leave quietly, but their voices have been heard.
It put Falun Gong on the map as a force in China.
3 months later, the crackdown. Thousands are arrested, tortured, and killed. The beginning of a genocide that continues today.
The decision that they will ban Falun Gong, the decision was made on April 25th.
But what made those silent protesters spend that April day in peaceful appeal? What sparked the brutal persecution that followed? And why has the world stayed mostly silent about the nightmare that many Falun Gong practitioners have endured throughout the past decade?
The other man said, beating Falun Gong to death is nothing and is counted as suicide. I said, even if you beat me to death, I will not tell you anything.
This is their story. A story of courage amid condemnation. A story of old brutality beneath the veneer of a new China. The story of Falun Gong.
I got there around 8 a.m.
Shi Caidong now lives in New York and can be seen practicing Falun Gong on weekends at Manhattan's Madison Square Park. But on April 25, 1999, he was a Chinese citizen who had a chance to meet the country's second most powerful person.
There were already a lot of people, a lot of practitioners had already arrived. From their attire, it looked like they were from the rural areas around Beijing.
They had come for one reason: to appeal for Falun Gong at the National Appeals Office in Beijing. China's network of appeals offices predates both Communist Party rule and the Chinese courts. It was traditionally a last resort for Chinese citizens who experienced some form of injustice. Shi says he decided to appeal after hearing that practitioners had been arrested in the neighboring city of Tianjin.
After I found out, I thought that we needed to appeal to government departments about the situation.
In Tianjin, practitioners had been protesting negative press coverage in the local media. But after being broken up by riot police and appealing to the local government, they were told they had to take their appeal to the National Appeals Office in Beijing. But taking the appeal to Beijing raised the stakes. Across from the National Appeals Office is the central leadership compound of Zhongnanhai, the most sensitive place in China. Surrounded by walls and armed guards, it houses the homes and offices of China's leaders. And as thousands of practitioners came looking for the appeals office, police directed them to spread out around the compound perimeter. But then, something unexpected.
I think I passed the West Gate, a big gate, and some people applauded. I guess they saw something and started clapping. I had already passed the gate, so I turned around to see why they were applauding, and some people said that Zhu Rongji came out.
Zhu Rongji, the Chinese premier and one of the architects of China's rise.
It's very hard to get an audience with Zhu Rongji, even for a secend.
I had passed the gate and so quickly turned around and went back so I could talk to him. Just as I went to cross the street, heading towards the gate, Zhu Rongji crossed the street from the other side. He said loudly as he walked, "Where have you come from? Who asked you to come?" Some practitioners said, "We're Falun Gong practitioners."
A very interesting detail is that Zhu Rongji was coming out without any bodyguard. So it is a clear signal that he knows that Falun Gong people are very peaceful. I can even saw his smile on his face.
Zhu Rongji then asked, "What are you doing here? Don't you have freedom of religion and belief?" As he walked and talked, in the end, he came pretty close to me. He said, "If you have any problems, find representatives and I'll talk with them." I raised my hand and said, "Premier Zhu, I can go." Many other practitioners also wanted to go in. So Zhu's assistant picked 3 people to return to Zhongnanhai.
Unless it's those ruling the country, only a handful of people ever enter Zhongnanhai. Access is limited to China's political elite and the occasional foreign dignitary.
When Zhu led us to Zhongnanhai, while he was walking, he asked, "Haven't I already ruled on the materials you sent in for appeal?" We were really confused when we heard this, because we didn't know that the Premier had made any decisions regarding our practice. And we thought that if there had been a decision, that we would know about it. So we were all very surprised and said that we didn't know. Zhu also thought it was strange when he saw that we didn't know, and he was pretty confused. He then said that he would ask the Commissioner of the National Appeals Office and the State Council Secretary General to talk to us. Very soon after, these officials Zhu Rongji went to look for arrived. We talked about the situation. The Tianjin police arrested Falun Gong practitioners, and that we hoped they would be released quickly. We also said that many practice sites were being harassed by local authorities, and that they had stopped us from practicing, and that we hoped we could have a legal and just place to practice. And I said that we hoped that Chuan Falun could be legally published. These were the 3 main requests we had.
They had made their appeal, but Zhu Rongji wasn't the only one who witnessed it.
Zhu Rongji came out, if I remember correctly, that was like 10 a.m. But then in the afternoon, suddenly, the atmosphere, you can feel the stress, because a lot of armed police suddenly ran out of Zhongnanhai and stood in front of us, about 2 meters, in between the armed police. They just line up in front of us. They look very serious. And then I had a feeling that Jiang Zemin was going to come out.
Jiang Zemin, the president and general secretary of the Chinese Communist Party. The only person more powerful than Zhu Rongji, and the only one who could disagree with him.
I saw 2 vehicles came out of Zhongnanhai. The speed was very high.
George asked that we not give his Chinese name to protect his family in China.
The windows were tinted. You can't see inside, but the passenger can see out. The police then added another line of guards, from 1 to 2 lines of police.
I saw that the situation was very tense, but we didn't feel at all scared. Why? Because we felt that we were right and just. I thought I hadn't done anything wrong.
And then they just drive away. He didn't come back. And then people say Jiang Zemin was in the car. When Jiang Zemin saw so many people gathering outside, he freaked out.
Later that day, Zheng circulated this letter, now published in his selected works, to the members of the Chinese Communist Party Central Committee. A new message. Today's event is worthy of our deep contemplation. Could it be that the Marxist ideals held by all Communist Party members and our belief in materialism and atheism can't triumph over the system of things propagated by the Falun Gong? If that were the case, wouldn't this be a big joke? All leading cadres in all levels, especially those in high levels, should be awake and clear-minded now. But it wasn't clear to those at the scene who was in the car as it drove off. Nothing else seemed to happen. Night fell and the quiet protest dispersed.
I think between 8 and 9 p.m. that evening, there was news that the Tianjin Falun Gong practitioners were released.
It seemed like the appeal had been successful, and for almost 3 months, practitioners all over China thought that they had won themselves the right to believe.
People thought that the Chinese government had handled it so well.
But beneath the surface, Jiang Zemin was getting ready to launch a nationwide ban on Falun Gong. A ban that would cost the country huge amounts of money and destroy the lives of tens of millions of Chinese people. China is not a country where protests are taken lightly, a lesson that was brought home by 1989's Tiananmen Square massacre. But China seemed to have changed a lot in the 10 years since. In 1989, almost no one had heard of Falun Gong. 10 years later, the government estimated that there were anywhere from 70 to 100 million people practicing it. Each morning, tens of millions of people woke up in the dark early hours to get to practice sites by 4 a.m. so that they could finish their exercises before work.
My exercise site was a square in front of my school. Every morning there were 300 to 400 people doing the group exercises.
Falun Gong is a practice of 5 relatively simple Qigong exercises. Qigong practices generally subscribe to philosophies similar to those of traditional Chinese medicine and martial arts. But Falun Gong differentiated itself from other Qigong schools by emphasizing the moral principles of truth, compassion, and tolerance.
I thought it was interesting and that their movements were very graceful, so I walked up to have a closer look. I saw a sign next to them explaining Falun Gong. After I read it, a person next to me began explaining what it was.
It was a time when such scenes were occurring all over China. The Cultural Revolution that began in the 60s had seen chaos, bloodshed, and the loss of countless cultural traditions. The openness and reform policies of the 80s opened China to foreign investment and trade. While Madonna was singing Material Girl in the West, in the East there was a new saying: to get rich is glorious.
One of the general problems that China has today is that there's no universally accepted set of values, and there's a tremendous sense, I think, of emptiness in the lives of lots of ordinary people, even party officials. And Qigong was notable because it had an appeal right up to the very top.
And like almost everything in China, Qigong was managed by the state.
Chinese government set up this so-called Qigong Research Society and to manage all these meditation Qigong groups. But this is run by the government, by the state.
In 1992, the founder of Falun Gong, Li Hongzhi, registered Falun Gong with the China Qigong Science Research Society. As Falun Gong became popular, the Research Society awarded Li the title Master of Qigong, and later Grand Master of Qigong. For 2 years, Li traveled to almost every major city in China, giving lectures and teaching the exercises. In the process, Li received both awards and media attention. Meanwhile, however, tensions were building between Falun Gong and the Research Society. Finally, in early '96, Falun Gong broke from the Research Society altogether. In Singapore in 1998, Li spoke to practitioners about the decision. Falun Gong used to be a branch of the China Qigong Science Research Society. We discovered, however, that the Qigong Science Research Society didn't conduct any scientific research, nor did it study Qigong practices or try to understand Qigong itself. It was only making money. It used Qigong practices to make money. So in March of 1996, we withdrew from it. They attacked us after our withdrawal, but we paid no attention to their attacks and ignored them. But leaving the society left Falun Gong at odds with the state.
Because in China, it's still a very tightly run society. It's a one-party system. And without the state support, it's very difficult to survive.
By 1996, Falun Gong was becoming more and more popular in China. But popularity brought with it some unwanted attention.
The first day when Falun Gong appeared, when it was not in this scale of practicing, the government was kind of happy. But when Falun Gong spread very fast, the government became alerted.
They know that people are hungry and they need something. And they will go with whatever it is that's useful until it threatens to become uncontrollable.
Some of the first problems Falun Gong had were with the media. In 1996, a national newspaper, The Enlightenment Daily, published a criticism of Falun Gong's main text, Zhuan Falun.
That's their way of doing it. During all of the political persecutions by the party, they would always start with the media and destroy their target step by step.
After that happened, a lot of people started to write letters to this daily newspaper. And some of the people also write to higher government official.
Faced with pressure, the paper buckled. It was a pattern that would be repeated many times. An article would be published, and practitioners would protest. Some would write letters, while others would show up in person. In almost every case, they would get an apology, a retraction, or both.
Why have some government departments in the country continued to disparage Falun Gong from 1996 until now? There has been criticism from 1996 until now. It is inconceivable. Cultivators are from all levels of society, from the party, politics, and the military. Some have been educated by the party for several decades and have a deep feeling for the party.
Later that year, the government banned all Falun Gong books from further publication. And the following year, in 1997, the Public Security Bureau began investigating Falun Gong practice sites.
A plainclothes police officer would go to the practice site every morning. He would do a name call every morning so he would know who was there and who wasn't. Everyone knew who he was because we all lived in the same neighborhood and we knew what he did.
The main goal of the investigation was to collect evidence that Falun Gong was a religion. China only recognizes 5 religions, so calling Falun Gong a religion would be a legal reason to ban it. But the investigation failed. A religion for China had to have a building, ceremonies, and a tangible organizational structure. Qigong practices typically had none of those. Falun Gong had a loose network of volunteers who taught the exercises in parks, but that's it.
We called them assistants. They were volunteer coordinators at the practice sites. There was no so-called leadership.
In 1998, the Public Security Bureau was again investigating Falun Gong, and practitioners around the country reported harassment and raids on their practice sites and homes. But the tipping point didn't come for another year. On April 11, 1999, a youth journal of the Tianjin College of Education published an article titled, "Why Young People Should Not Practice Qigong." But this time, when practitioners came to appeal, the Public Security Bureau told the paper not to back down.
After we spoke to an official from the paper and explained the situation, the official acknowledged that they had made a mistake, that they hadn't understood the situation clearly, and they could rectify it. But after one day of sleep, on the next day, he came out and said they actually hadn't done anything wrong.
After 11 days of stalemate, the Public Security Bureau dispatched riot police and broke up the protest by force. Many people were beaten, and about 45 were arrested. As a response, practitioners appealed to the city and provincial governments, but they were told it was out of their hands, and they had to take their appeals to Beijing.
News of the incident quickly spread around because Beijing was close to Tianjin, and Falun Gong practitioners nearby found out about this very quickly.
In the morning, I went to the practice site. A fellow practitioner told me what happened in Tianjin.
In 7 years, Falun Gong had attracted 70 to 100 million practitioners. But the fortunes of Falun Gong were about to change dramatically. It was a turning point, a critical moment in the history of modern China. For Falun Gong, it was their last chance to stop the investigations and harassment, and to lift the ban of the books.
By the evening, some practitioners came out and said that everything had been explained. They said everyone should go home.
The protest attracted a lot of attention, but it didn't put a dent in Falun Gong's popularity in China.
It was very impressive to outsiders, and I think to other Chinese, because it showed that it was possible to organize something completely outside of the state sector. That it's now possible to have organizations that are completely autonomous. They don't depend on state subsidies. They don't depend on state tolerance. They just operate on their own, the way a normal private organization operates in most countries. That's something new for China.
And later on, after April 25th, in fact, the Chinese press also publicly saying that there's no policy against Falun Gong, and people have the right for freedom of meditation and practice.
But in reality, time was running out, and the persecution was getting closer and closer.
But all these things changed on July 20th, 1999.
inside the movement that changed the course of history.
Falun Gong is threatening to the Chinese leadership and the Chinese bureaucracy precisely because it stresses principles that just by naming the principles, you're insulting the Chinese bureaucracy. Particularly truth, and that's the one that has the most power.
Throughout my life, I felt that everywhere I found myself was just not quite right for me. I had been seeking something, but now I had finally found it. I felt I had come home.
I used to feel that life was very tiresome. I guess I'm speaking spiritually. Like the heart is tired. The feeling I got after reading the book was that this is how a person can live.